Alex Poatan Pereira.
Let's go.
And he is going to be fighting Khalil Rountree. This one came as a big surprise to me. UFC 307 it is. So not the next pay-per-view, but the one after in early October. Couple of questions. One, did you see this fight coming? I don't think many of us did. Two, do you think it's the right move for the UFC to make a guy who was, just pulled from a fight for, and I'll give that it was extenuating circumstances. I don't think that Khalil Rountree was using banned substances purposefully or maliciously. So let me just preface it with that. But do you think it's appropriate for a guy who just popped, for a banned substance, had to have a fight canceled with Jamal Hill to then be thrust into a title shot? And final question, because I want to break down the technical aspect of this as well, but final question about the fight itself. Is there anybody that the UFC dislikes more than Magomed Ankalaev?
Right? Yeah. Well, so that's a whole different thing, and he's got rackets to deal with. But after that whole controversial loss, and then he was really angry in the Octagon, everybody's online saying, "Oh, Ankalaev, we'll get GTA 6 before Ankalaev gets a title shot."
Controversial no contest, I believe it was. That was the Jan Blachowicz fight. Yeah.
Yeah. So regardless, he thought he won that fight, and he was very upset and vocal about it. And one thing you have to understand with the UFC is they don't like when people go against them. The UFC is a company, and they're an entertainment business. They do not have control of the judges. They don't have control of everything that takes place in their sport. Now, they make the great fights, and if you do what you need to do, you'll wind up going up the rankings and wind up in a title fight. And I believe that's still the future for Ankalaev. I'm confident in saying we'll see Ankalaev in a title fight very soon. But when you look at the landscape of the division, you look at the champion who is 37.
Pereira's 37. Yeah,
he's not going to be around all that much longer. And one thing that we need out of Pereira, just like we needed out of Israel Adesanya a couple years ago, was activity. I mean, Pereira has defended belts or been in title fights 5 times in the last 22 months, which sounds ridiculous and insane and like a record until you find out that Israel Adesanya did the same thing in 18 months.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh my God, so these guys are really heavy lifters. They become the face of the organization and all reliable for Dana White. They can always call on them. You got a main event slot. It's going to be entertaining. He's got the it factor, so the fans love him. And styles make matchups. And look, if I were to ask you right now, even before this fight was made, aside from Alex Pereira, who is the most intimidating, scary threat for Alex Pereira at light heavyweight? Yeah, you might say Ankalaev stylistically, but I believe Khalil Rountree, and it's not just me, the whole internet agrees with this. He's the most vicious striker that the UFC has. Like, people say, like, man, look at Khalil Rountree. It looks like he's beating you up and you owe him money or something, right? These are the types of compliments that Khalil Rountree gets. And for me, I love Alex Pereira. I know that he's a special fighter, and I don't want to protect him by any means from grapplers or people that have a differing style from him. But he's so fun to watch. He's done so many things for the UFC that it makes sense for me to give him the next best striker in the division, somebody who's hot, somebody who everybody believes is a top 3 guy skill-wise in the division, and who will make a fun fight for Alex Pereira. So while I'm not going to be the guy that's like, oh yeah, I saw this coming a mile away, I knew Rountree was going to get the next title shot. I'm not saying that, but as soon as his name started kind of getting talked about, and you looked at the rest of the landscape, you've got the Jan Blachowicz, and now you've got Rakic and Ankalaev, and there's not that much. Jamal Hill's, he lost not that long ago. It sort of makes sense to put Khalil Rountree in against Pereira. We need Pereira active. We don't need to wait around and see what happens between Rakic and Ankalaev. We can always bank on them later. Let's keep Pereira very active. And I think that's a great thing for the UFC. I think it's a great fight. It's a very winnable fight for Pereira. But at the same time, Khalil Rountree fights like you owe him money, like I said earlier. And if you go out there and you're just trying to play a game with him, or you're trying to fight at a more sparring pace, you're going to wind up behind and possibly unconscious on the canvas. I don't see Pereira winding up in that situation, but this fight is very compelling. It's going to be a very difficult fight for Alex Pereira. And because the styles are so unique, and it's going to be basically 100% a striking match, this evens out the playing field a bit. You got a guy who came from heavyweight, who carries a ton of power down in the 205 division, and you've got a guy who can shut the lights out on anybody. So there's the margin for error, but when you have Pereira versus Rountree is very small. Neither guy can afford to get touched too many times by the other one. And that's why I think it's a fun fight. I think it's the next best fight for Pereira. I don't want to call it a tune-up at all because I think it's actually a very difficult fight. Yeah. But as far as the landscape goes, Khalil Rountree gets the nod in my book.
Yeah, I mean, I think Magomed Ankalaev certainly had a claim to be the title challenger.
Right.
I'm not going to dispute that. But, Magomed Ankalaev with that, the controversial, whatever decision draw, no contest with Jan Blachowicz, that the way he handled that, I don't think the UFC loved.
No.
And, I think that he's kind of been on their you-know-what list since that day happened.
Right.
He does have the skills to contend for the belt at 185. I actually don't think that's as easy of a fight for Magomed as a lot of people do. I think Alex's grappling is very underrated, and I think he can massively expose Ankalaev on the feet. That said, I do think Ankalaev was the rightful guy. But Rountree, to me, is the second most rightful guy, and I'll tell you why. Because Yuri is higher than him in the rankings. Yuri just got knocked out by Alex.
Right.
Jamal Hill just got knocked out by Alex. Jan Blachowicz is around, but he also lost to Alex when they fought. Magomed and Rakic have their date, so they're both locked up, and Rakic is coming off a loss. So, yeah, take the guy that's a really hot striker, that's on a win streak, that's on a knockout streak, and throw him in there with the champion and see what he can do. I think Alex is going to win this fight. Yeah. I'm not going to bury the lead and tell you that, I think it could go either way. My prediction is going to remain Alex Pereira. I don't think that will change. Alex Pereira, he's too powerful. He times things too well. Khalil's going to come in aggressively, and I think that it's just a matter of time before Alex finds that finishing sequence. Okay. But that being said, I do believe this is going to be one of the most entertaining striking fights that we have seen in a long time,
100%.
Especially in the heavier weight classes, while it lasts. I think it's going to last 2-3 rounds at the most, and it is going to be back and forth. You're going to be on the edge of your seats. We all are going to be on the edge of our seats while this fight is taking place. But ultimately, I think there's just skills pay the bills, and there's a little bit of a skill disparity in this one. Alex Pereira being the more skillful striker, and I think he's going to expose Khalil Rountree with a beautiful combination, and he's shown us against Yuri that it's not just that front hook and those great punches that can get the job done. He's got some absolutely devastating switch kicks. He's got some beautiful knees. He's got some great clinch work.
Yep.
I'm excited to see the full spectrum of Alex Pereira's striking gamut, and I think he gets the job done probably in the second or third round knockout of Khalil Rountree.
Yeah, it's a great prediction, and I believe, the odds makers have it right. He's a slight favorite right now, and that'll probably bounce around a little bit, but I don't ever see him being the underdog in this fight.
No.
Khalil Rountree is as tough of an opponent as he's going to face. And I think stylistically and the intensity that Khalil brings is going to bring a different energy out of Pereira. Pereira fights at a very methodical, cool, calm, collected pace, and he's always dictating the range and the pace of the fight. Khalil Rountree kind of loves to throw a wrench into those plans. He wants to make it ugly. I think Khalil's going to have a speed advantage over Pereira. I think Khalil's got a speed advantage over everybody. And when you're talking about 3 pounds of pressure on the chin, if you're fast enough to get to the position you need to score your shot on that target, then you can wind up having some success. I think the intensity of Khalil Rountree is going to cause a little bit of difficulty for Alex Pereira early on in the fight. But yeah, if you ask me my prediction right now, I'm going Pereira, and just like you, I think a finish. But I think there's going to be a lot of exchanges. I think we might see both guys wind up getting rocked at some points. And it's not because I don't think Pereira's head and shoulders above Khalil Rountree as far as striking goes. I just think stylistically, Alex Pereira has probably fought 10, 20 guys with a similar shape, body, and fighting style as Khalil Rountree, and that doesn't include his MMA career. That's talking about the kickboxing. I don't see this fight going to the ground really at all. Maybe once or twice we'll see something up against the cage where it gets dragged to the ground, but this is going to be a stand-up striking event, and whoever is the better striker is going to get their hand raised. And the only caveat, I would venture to say Alex is a better striker, and he's more buttoned up, and he knows how to find his target better. But Khalil is very intense. He knows how to find his target, and like I said, the speed is usually the difference maker in his fights, especially at light heavyweight. So I think Khalil has a good chance at this, but it's a tough fight for him. I think Alex is firing on all cylinders, and he's the favorite for a reason. I think Alex Pereira probably still gets his hand raised.
Yeah, and I'll just leave that one at this: precision beats power, and timing beats speed. Conor McGregor made that very famous,
Right.
And I love to use that quote, especially in situations like this, because I do believe Khalil Rountree is actually more powerful than Pereira.
Yeah.
But the precision of Pereira to land that hook and follow up, and even that switch kick to Yuri, the timing and the precision is what. Now, obviously, Alex Pereira can crack.
Right.
Don't get me wrong; he's extremely powerful,
And
but
he's fast himself.
yeah, he's precise, and his timing and his technique is beautiful.
Yeah.
And I think Khalil's going to be the stronger, more powerful guy, but the precision and the timing of Alex Pereira is going to win the day.
Yeah, it's going to feel a lot like a Muay Thai fight, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Both dudes are very good at kicking range, boxing range, but one interesting aspect about this fight, I don't see it taking place on the ground hardly at all, and probably not that much against the cage, but I guarantee we see a lot of good clinch work from both guys, offensively and defensively. Maybe we'll see some trips, maybe we'll see some vicious knees up the front, but all in all, these guys are going to make for a very exciting fight for the UFC. I believe, even though Khalil Rountree is a very hard fight, I don't think he's the absolute hardest fight for Pereira right now in the division. But Pereira's done so much. He's fought so many. Everybody at light heavyweight that he's fought so far is a champion or former champion. So I'm not, like I said, I'm not calling Khalil Rountree a tune-up in the least bit. But what I'm saying is he's done so much heavy lifting for you guys. Instead of feeding him some Russian who's going to take him to the ground and possibly steal some of his thunder, give him a guy that stylistically he should probably beat, somebody who's exciting, somebody who's going to bring a fight to him and really bring out the best in Alex Pereira. I think that's the direction the UFC sees. They're like, okay, this is perfect. We'll get Khalil Rountree in here. We're going to have a really fun fight. Highlights galore are going to come out of this fight. And then eventually, whoever wins between Rakic or Ankalaev next year will get their shot at Pereira. But I think right now, this is the perfect direction for the light heavyweight division to go. I don't think the light heavyweight division has been this exciting in quite some time. So for me, this is a big one. Pereira's probably going to get his hand raised, but don't be surprised if Khalil Rountree brings more than what everybody, the odds makers in Pereira, are expecting.
Yeah, and before we move on to the fight night main event this coming weekend, I just want to touch on all those that say that the UFC cherry picks fights for Pereira.
Yeah, that's not right.
Who in the UFC has beaten 5 former champions in the last 2 years besides Alex Pereira?
Nobody.
I mean, the guy's resume is insane. And yes, he's fighting I think Khalil Rountree's number 8. He's fighting the number 8 guy, and there's probably people that are more deserving.
Right.
Fine, I get that. But look at every other division. When has somebody who probably wasn't deserving been thrust into a title fight? That happens more than you realize. So
and there's always a chance, right? I don't mean to cut you off, but
Steve Erceg was the last one.
Was number
there we
10.
Go. Yeah.
Sugar Sean was number 11 when he fought Peter Yan, and I understand that was the number 1. But you're talking about big jumps in the division, and just because the number on your next to your name isn't as high up as maybe the championship or 1, 2, 3 doesn't mean that your styles can't present a lot of problems for your opponent. So yeah, I don't think this is a lofty move by the UFC. I don't think this is a stretch. I don't think this is a tune-up. I think Khalil Rountree is the right guy, and I think he's going to bring a serious fight.
Me too. And so let's just finish.